We have a full week ahead of us. To help get things started, we'll first hear from the APEC Secretariat's Executive Director, Dr. Alan Bollard, who will discuss issues and actions in view of as ministers from the 21 APEC member economies convene starting this afternoon, and leaders who will begin to meet on Wednesday. As the Executive Director, Dr. Bollard advances APEC's agenda and executes APEC's work program as mandated by leaders and ministers. He is based in Singapore. Followed by Dr. Bollard, we will give the floor to the APEC Policy Support Unit Director, Dr. Dennis Hu, who will discuss the findings of the latest economic trends. Dr. Hu and his team provide research and policy recommendations in support of APEC's work agenda. Once Dr. Bollard and Dennis Hu conclude their remarks, we can take questions related to the activities here during APEC Economic Leaders Week. Why don't we get started? Dr. Bollard?
Good. Thank you very much, Michael, and thanks for the opportunity to brief you. APEC is a big, complex organisation with a lot of initiatives, so I'm aiming to give you a very brief overview of some of the big things that you might like to explore. APEC is all about economics, opening up the region, trade, investment, integration, and trying to increase economic growth and improve living standards. This year, Philippines has been hosting a whole series of meetings, and of course this is the climax at this time of the year, with ministers meeting this afternoon and then leaders, economic leaders coming in over the next few days. The theme that Philippines has put on this year has been a little bit different. It's about inclusive economy. So we've all seen very strong economic growth around the region, but it's been a focus this year to look at where that growth is going and how to improve the prospects for those parts of the economy that are not as well integrated into the economic push from the APEC region. And that has meant a focus on areas like small business, like services, like women in the economy, a bit on the environment, and some other disaster recovery issues also that Philippines has got an interest in. In the focus that we've had on, for example, small business, we've been trying to look at how electronic technologies that are opening up electronic commerce possibilities are working for small, medium enterprises, but also micro enterprises, so the very smallest as well. And there's a number of initiatives underway looking at those. In addition, we are trying to ensure that the work going on in free trade agreements, in trade facilitation, so red tape at the borders, how you get goods and services across borders through customs and so on, is working for small business as well as working for larger business. And in addition, we've of course over the last couple of years seen the development of global value chains or supply chains, and they're changing the picture for small businesses who used to find it very hard to trade unless you were large or a state-owned enterprise or something like that, and are now able to clip into supply chains and get the benefits of this sort of integration also. It's been a chance also for us all to focus in on services. APEC has led the way really for the world in terms of integration of manufacturing and merchandise trade, and that's all the pictures of goods going in big ships across the ocean. But actually, almost all our economies in this region are going through a transformation where much more important is the services sector. And so far, I don't think we lead the world in terms of services integration. But Philippines is a good place to start the work from because it already has a large international trade in services. And we've been going through looking at what the barriers to services trade is, and they're not traditional tariff barriers. They're much more likely to be regulatory issues in terms of getting not so much goods across borders, but people, capital, information, data, all those sorts of things. I'd say in addition to all of that, we continue our focus on regional economic integration, how we get the benefits of the forces of growth right through the APEC economies. And there, well, let me focus on one big thing, which was actually agreed last year. It's work on a strategic study for free trade area for Asia and the Pacific. A major study is now underway right through the whole region, and progress will be reviewed by ministers this afternoon and tomorrow. This report will be finalised next year. It is being chaired jointly by China and the United States, and it looks potentially at the future of trade arrangements around the region. In addition, we continue many of the areas of work on regional economic integration and also our interest in economic trends throughout the region. And at this stage, I'll hand back to our chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ballard. Now let's hear from Dr. Dennis Hu on his comments on economic trends here in APEC.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide some highlights on our latest APEC Economic Trends and Analysis report. This report comes out twice a year, and what we try to do is to provide the latest updates in terms of the economic situation and outlook for the region. Could you put on the PowerPoint slide, please? Okay, next slide, please. As you can see from the region, some of the most latest numbers that we have for the second quarter of 2015, the region grew by 3.1%. So we're seeing a much more moderate pace of growth, still positive for the region, particularly compared to the second quarter of last year in 2014, where the region grew by 3.4%. It's slightly lower than first quarter of this year, which grew at 3.2%. Next slide, please. In terms of drivers of growth, private consumption continues to be the main driver of growth for the region. We find that across all the APEC economies, private consumption grew in the second quarter of this year, ranging from about 0.2% up to 9.1% growth for the second quarter. Much of that is driven by much more lower interest rate regime in the region, which is gives a much more favorable in terms of credit and financial conditions. We also seen the recent drop in oil prices, which basically increases the disposable income for many households in the region. A recent PSU study has looked at some of the drivers of growth for the region, and we found that since the global financial crisis of 2008, we see the relationship in terms of responsiveness of GDP growth has become much more significant in relation to private consumption, much more so than what I would call the traditional relationship between trade and growth. That report itself is quite interesting, and please feel free to take a look at that report, which has been uploaded on the website a few weeks ago. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hu. May we now invite the floor for questions?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I've got one or two more slides. In terms of, if you can see here, in terms of trade, we see a major contraction in trade growth in the region, reflecting essentially the very slow global economic recovery in the region. In terms of exports growth, we see that it's actually contraction for the first 6 months of this year. Exports contracted by 5.9% for the first 6 months of this year. And in terms of import growth, it's even far more significant in terms of contraction by about 10.3%. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. We see essentially moderate growth for the APEC region this year at about 3.1%, but we expect to see a recovery in 2016 to about 3.4% for the region as a whole. We see that reflecting recovery, particularly in advanced APEC economies, and that translates to improvements and pickups in terms of external demand and greater imports coming from particularly developing APEC economies. Having said that, of course, there remains to be some downside risks which will have implications on the economic outlook for the APEC region. One, of course, is the persistent low prices in terms of oil and commodity prices. We also are concerned about the the China's economy, whether China will be having a hard landing or a soft landing in terms of its economic growth. For the time being, we're still looking at an economic growth in China moderating to about 6.8 to 7% for this year. And lastly, of course, U.S. interest rates, when the U.S. will have its liftoff in terms of raising interest rates, whether it will be later this year or next year, we're not sure until the Fed decides. There will be a meeting, I think, in December to decide on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hu and Dr. Ballard, for providing the context under which leaders and ministers are meeting this week. May I invite the floor for questions? Here, the woman in blue. If you could please keep your questions related to APEC, and please state your name and news organization.
Thank you. I'm Sophie from Mas TV, Macau. Okay, I have two questions for Dr. Ballard. Why did the committee this year set inclusive economy as the theme of APEC this year? And how do you evaluate the inclusiveness of Asia-Pacific economy so far? And also, obviously, some organizations and agreements like TPP exclude certain countries. Do you think this is against the spirit of inclusive economy? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The focus on inclusiveness has generally been a focus within economies, not between economies. Actually, the record of APEC over the last several decades has been one where growth rates have brought economies together. So we don't think that's been really the need for the focus. The focus has been on what's been happening inside economies. We are looking at measurements for those sort of things. Of course, they're quite complex and they're not just economic. But we think also it's really, to be practical, too early to know what APEC's initiatives for this year what effects they will have had on the economies, because their multi-year programs is going to take some time to do. I see basically Philippines this year as having turned APEC in that direction, and we'll continue with some of those areas. Your second question, which I think was about trade agreements being exclusive, not inclusive. Well, of course, APEC is voluntary, inclusive, and moves forward by consensus. It's quite inclusive in that way. In principle, every economy's got a veto within APEC. I suspect you're really talking about TPP and the economies that are in that or not. That isn't an APEC initiative. They are 12 members all from APEC, but that's up to them how they negotiate that and how they open it up for potential new membership, and we'll watch that with interest over the next few years.
Okay. Hi, good morning. My name is Fitri Shaminam from the Brunei Times. Yeah, the question is directed at the panel, if any of you can answer it. So according to a report by the Manila Bulletin today, quoting Mr. Ganeshan Wignaraja, an advisor of economic research at ADB, SMEs are important in economies but not in trade. Data showed that Philippines' share of the world supply chain exports in 2013 was a negligible 1%. Brunei's share, alongside Myanmar and Laos, was 0. Could you confirm if this is the case, and if not, then what are your takes on the importance of SMEs in the region, including of Brunei's? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Well, that's very relevant to what we're doing, and the assessment obviously is that SMEs, and particularly micro enterprises, are much less integrated in trade than larger companies. But the numbers you are mentioning seem to me surprisingly low. I know, for example, Thailand, Vietnam, small, medium enterprises account for something a bit over 1/3 of trade, and we're trying to open that up. Of course, it's a big question what you're measuring as small business in that. Can I ask Dr. Hu?
Yeah, I think also in terms of initiatives, there is the Boracay Action Agenda to support micro and small medium enterprises. And that was unveiled this year in the Philippines here. And as part of that action agenda, they are trying to see how they can assist small and medium enterprises in terms of helping them to globalize and to be more plugged into global value chains. So there's a fair amount of work that will continue to be done from this year onwards to try to support them.
Question here?
Yes, Warren de Guzman of ANC. I just came from the briefing of PwC with regards to the CEO survey, the fifth one. They came out with some statistics. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it shows that most of the CEOs in the region, about 800 of them participated in the survey. They're more concerned, actually, with regards to free trade. They see free trade as happening. They're not really concerned with regards to which initiative is pushed, TPP or FTAP or RCEP. I'd like to get your reaction to that. And also, they saw that broadband will play a bigger role in expanding trade in the region, even more so than free trade agreements between sovereign states. Can I also get your reaction to that?
Yes, thank you for that. We have seen the survey, and it doesn't surprise me that chief executives say they want to see trade being made easier, and they're not necessarily going to get into all the details of this quite complicated noodle bowl of trade arrangements. And that's for all of us to help sort out and try and make it clearer for them. The role that APEC has played in this has been something of a test kitchen, testing new recipes for noodle bowls and coming up with interesting ideas that we can try out on a voluntary consensus arrangement and then help feed into some of the more formal, legally binding trade arrangements. For us, what's important is that it be easy to trade and invest and integrate and get living standards up as a result of all of that. There is a huge amount of stuff going on. We think that generally speaking, the technological developments at the minute are helping. So global supply chains, electronic technologies across borders that are making it easier. What we're trying to do is ensure that all those systems are harmonised or at least can talk to one another or work on common platforms. And increasingly, it is things like broadband and moving information and data across borders that's just as important as big container ships containing merchandise goods going across the Pacific as well. So I think we're right on board on all of that. Philippines this year has run a number of workshops with the business sector. We've had the same message from them, particularly out of the Philippines where there's a lot of software developers and operations in the services sector. They're saying it's not necessarily tariff barriers, it's what's in behind the borders, it's regulation for telecommunications, it's systems for getting information across borders, and they want to see that all happen seamlessly.
Maybe I can just add that it's quite known that trade on the online marketplace has been growing by leaps and bounds, and that within APEC itself there is a steering committee on the internet economy that has been set up and established this year to look into many of these issues and how basically economies can facilitate greater trade, particularly on the online marketplace.
Question here.
I'm Lee Bo Lee, Voice of America. When I understand, I appreciate what you guys are saying about this forum is not about other things, but economy and trade. But when much of the trade passed through the South China Sea, it's inevitable some member countries would like to discuss about it. So from an organization point of view, how do you accommodate the needs or the wishes of some certain countries like the United States want to talk about this issue, or accommodate the wishes of the host country who has consistently said this is not the right forum? So could you please give your, how do you plan to handle that? Thanks.
Well, you're right. APEC is about economic matters and only about economic matters. We're not like ASEAN or some of the other arrangements that would include security issues. So formally around the APEC table, those things don't get discussed. They're not part of formal APEC agendas. We're talking about trade and economics And personally, I'm not hearing about concerns on the trade side like that. There will, in addition, in Manila be a series of bilateral meetings. Those are private meetings between parties taking advantage of the fact that they're all here. And we won't know what goes on in those. That's entirely up to leaders and ministers how they handle those meetings. They're not formal APEC joint meetings. In addition, I'd just say that leaders at the moment are meeting in Turkey right now at G20. Clearly, they will be talking about security matters there. After they come to Manila, many of them will head on to Kuala Lumpur for the Asian Economic Summit. That does have a tradition where they can talk about security matters as well. Generally speaking, we find that from right around the region, leaders and ministers know that what has worked for APEC to get growth up and to get trade up is to treat this as an economic forum, and so we're confident that will continue this year.
Please.
Good morning, Ron Dulay from the Philippines. Sir, you've mentioned a while ago about the Philippines is a good place to start business. Can you elaborate on this, and how do you think the other member economies view the Philippines as a good place to start business?
No, I didn't say that. I gave some examples on the services sector. What Philippines has brought this year to APEC has been a couple of interesting backgrounds. A lot of small business, so a big focus on small and micro business. A big focus on services. Philippines is very advanced on the services sector, and particularly the trade in the services sector. So call centres, other backroom services, and increasingly front office services as well. So they have shown leadership on that side. In addition, I mentioned women in the economy, and Philippines is the only economy around APEC where women own most of the businesses. So clearly that's been a big opportunity for Philippines to talk about that and lead a number of meetings that have been focused on women in the economy, women in small businesses, women and technology, making finance more accessible to women entrepreneurs and so forth. So there have been particular Philippines focus, but in terms of good places to do business, you can look at the ease of doing business indexes that the World Bank puts out that we also use, and you can make your judgments out of that. One other big focus that is very Filipino this year has been on natural disasters and what it's meant for communities, because of course Philippines has experienced many different natural disasters. And there we've had a focus on how to identify those, how to predict them better, the issues around climate change that are leading to some of those disasters, how to ensure that global value chains are more resilient in the face of natural disasters. And we've had also some very practical initiatives about how, in the case where that happens, we can get disaster recovery teams, equipment and dogs in across borders quickly without getting them caught up in the usual customs arrangements and so on.
Good morning, Christian Esguerra from ANC for Dr. Ballard. The priority of APEC obviously is the establishment of the FTAP, and you mentioned earlier that it will be reviewed by the ministers later. But here you have another set of economies moving toward a similar direction, so it seems, with the TPP. So how do you see the TPP in light of your move toward FTAP? How do you see the two of them relating to each other?
So APEC, as I said before, has not been involved formally in TPP, but of course we've observed progress, and we'll all be pleased to see the text out in the public arena now so that we can judge that. And I think it's fair to say that APEC doesn't want to see different trade agreements going off in different directions, wouldn't want to see TPP as a rich economy club going off like that. And we've got the regional comprehensive economic partnership that Philippines and other economies are involved in, also quite well advanced. We don't want to see them going in a different direction. We have the Pacific Alliance, which was ratified this year and involves 4 Latin American economies, 3 of them APEC members, and there will be a side meeting on the Pacific Alliance and APEC leaders this time. And in addition, for the ASEAN Economic Community, it's 2015. It's the year when a lot of deadlines all come together on that as well. Actually, there's 150 trade agreements going on around the APEC region. It is very complicated. We see FTAP study as the way where we're able to judge where all those are going, how much they fit together, could they conflict with one another, and what might come to help integrate all that moving together into the future. So that's the main aim of the study. We're bringing them all together within that, and we'll be able to make a judgment eventually next year about how they fit together.
Man with the black. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Ballard. I'm Teresa Serrojano from the Associated Press. Would you say the leaders, would the leaders be talking about the upcoming meeting on climate change in Paris? And do you expect them to make a call for a more ambitious goal when they meet there?
Well, thank you. The leaders' statement, of course, isn't final yet until leaders approve it, so we'll have to see if they have anything to say about that. Generally speaking, they certainly will be talking about a number of initiatives that APEC has got underway. They're around more efficient use of energy. They're around environmental goods, where there's a list that's been agreed where we reduce tariffs down below 5%, and this is the target year for that to all happen. And we have some a number of quite practical work underway on low carbon model cities, one of which is in the Philippines. So they will be pointing to all of those, and we'll have to wait and see whether or not they specifically talk about the upcoming Paris climate change meetings.
Good morning. This is for Mr. Hugh. My name is Pangeran Punca from CNN Indonesia. On your slideshow, you mentioned about the APEC's GDP's growth. And how big do you think, if the Fed rate is really increasing next year, for the APEC's GDP growth? And how big is the impact for the trade, especially for the developing country, because potentially the US dollar is increasing too? Thank you.
Yeah, I think movements of interest rates in the US, first of all, will mainly have some concerns and implications on financial markets. But as long as the decision to raise interest rates and the amount of how much they will raise interest rates are done in an orderly and predictable fashion, I don't see them being a significant impact on financial markets. As you know, one of the concerns is that raising interest rates may see some concerns about capital outflow from emerging markets back to the US. But as I mentioned, as long as it's done in a liftoff is done in an orderly fashion, I think that should be fine. But trade, I think itself, I think there has been some concerns that trade performance in the APEC region has been underperforming, and partly because, as I mentioned earlier, there's been concerns of the engines of growth in the region, China, US, and so I think it's important to take that into account in terms of the downside risk, whether China's transformation into a much more consumption-led economy is done also in an orderly and systematic fashion, and how much of that will impact on trade growth will be something to look at over the next couple of years.
May I see if there's any more questions? Going once, going twice. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Please check back at the APEC website, www.apec.org, for updates and developments this week. Thank you.